Welcome to Type 1 Podcast, the podcast where we look at the scientific fact or fiction behind your favorite pop culture. My name is Natalie. My pronouns are she, they. And today I'm inviting Dr. Erinn Fagan-Jeffries onto the pod to talk about Alien. How are you?
Hey, Nat, I'm good.
Yeah. Oh, great. You want to just start off by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about what kind of research you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, I am a researcher at Adelaide Uni at the moment, and I work on parasitic wasps. So I do taxonomy, so trying to find and delimit and identify new species or species that are unknown to science. And we try and give them a formal description so that they're identifiable by both other scientists and the public or anyone who wants to be able to identify the insects they find out in the world. And we give them a name so that they've got a scientific name that everyone can use, and we all know we're talking about the same organism. So that's what a taxonomist does, and the group I specialize on are a group of parasitic wasps in the family Braconidae.
Cool. Why did you pick Braconidae as your special family of interest?
Yeah, well, I kind of fell into it because I knew that I wanted to study insects and I loved entomology. But in terms of how I got into wasps and this particular family, it was just by chance that this was the group that the professor that I wanted to work with for my PhD had available as a project. And the more I sort of started looking into them, the more interesting they became. And I think, you start researching something and you get hooked on it. And yeah, it's been a really fun journey so far.
Cool. Yeah. How many different families of parasitoid wasp are there?
Oh, there's a
I know
lot.
there's
So
quite a lot, but
yeah, well, because I guess when you think of a wasp, I mean, even for me, the first thing that pops into your head is probably like a yellow and black European wasp, at least in Australia, because that's the thing we see around us so
is
much, and
that
it bothers.
Vespidae?
Yeah, that's the family
Good.
Vespidae. So that bothers you at your barbecues, and they can sting and they give all wasps a bad name. But that wasp is a social wasp and lives in a colony, and that actually has only happened a few times in wasps. Most wasps are actually not social; they're parasitoids. So most of the families of wasps are actually parasitic or parasitoid wasps. So yeah, there's a lot.
Cool. Now that's good. It does definitely seem like a lot of whatever you're most exposed to is how you think of the whole, the whole order or the whole family or something. I do remember seeing someone that did a PhD seminar or something on cockroaches, and even
Mhm.
I quite like insects, and I was like, oh, cockroaches.
Yeah.
But there were these really beautiful ones that were just not the horrible invasive like German American European cockroach types, so that's
Yeah,
super
native
cool.
cockroaches are beautiful. They come in all sorts of different colors and shapes, and I guess wasps are the same. It's just that, the big, colorful, yellow ones that we see around are the things that are most easily identifiable and associable with wasps. And then we have all these beautiful native wasps, thousands and thousands of species, but it's just that maybe a little bit smaller and we don't notice them as often.
I don't think I've ever actually seen a parasitoid wasp in the wild. Actually, no, I did see one by accident inside a pinned insect collection.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
I had a caterpillar in there
Mhm.
that I had preserved, or tried to, clearly badly preserved because an adult wasp managed to emerge from it. So
That's amazing.
it was very small, and I had an extremely long. I don't want to say stinger. I know it's not that. What's it called?
Mhm.
The
Ovipositor.
ovipositor. There we go.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that was cool.
Yeah, cool.
So the reason why I've asked you on today to bring your expert knowledge is to talk about Alien. And what really drew my attention to Alien as being comparable to parasitoid wasps is how they have a complex multi-stage life cycle that has, slightly different dramatically different body forms between life stages, and also that parasitoid chest burster that's coming out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think it's clearly involves a parasitoid. I guess we're using terms like parasite and parasitoid, and it's good to define them just
Yep.
because people use the word parasite probably more often, in everyday language. And in insect terms or entomology, we tend to think of a parasite as an organism that has to feed off another organism to survive, but doesn't generally kill the host. So something like head lice is a good example of a parasite where, the host is humans, but we don't generally die from having head lice. Whereas a parasitoid, we tend to think of as insects that actually have to kill the host to be able to complete their life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so alien definitely fits into that.
Which is so cool, but not something you want to see in real life at
Yeah.
a human scale. I was thinking it might be easiest to just start off having a look at the whole life cycle. So I've watched Aliens as well, which is the second one, which is really interesting, but not very convenient because they introduce a whole nother life stage that's not in the first one. So what we do see is in Alien is sorry, I forgot to ask, what's your experience with the movie Alien? Had you seen it before?
Yeah, I'd seen it a long time ago because I knew that supposedly the idea for the alien was actually influenced by parasitoid wasps. And the
Yes.
creator for Alien, was apparently inspired by parasitic wasps and has mentioned it in interviews and things about the film before. So when we went to name some new species recently, we were trying to come up with some fun, quirky names, and somehow I got onto Alien and the fact it was inspired by parasitic wasps, and the creature in there, as you know, is called the Xenomorph.
Mm-hmm.
But we realized that no one had actually named a wasp after the Xenomorph, kind of paying homage back to that original inspiration for the movie. So we named one of our wasps the species name Xenomorph in honor of the movie that was, inspired by the wasps
That's
in
so
the first
cool.
place. So at that point, I rewatched the movie, and yeah,
Yeah,
it's a good
it is
classic.
a good movie. What's the name of that wasp species?
It's Dolichogenidia xenomorph. So we just
Okay.
use the name of what they call the alien in the movie
Mm-hmm.
as the species name. And I think since then there's now been a genus of fossil wasp named after the xenomorph as well. But I might need
Oh,
to fact check
cool.
that one.
Hey, it's Editing Nat coming to you live from my room and from my blocked sinuses. Yes, I have a cold and I apologise that the rest of the editing you'll hear my tender nasal tones. So, Erin might have been using the royal we because she was actually the one that discovered Dolichogenidia xenomorph as a PhD student. And the other ones that she was talking about is the extinct genus of Xenomorphia, comprising two species, Xenomorphia resurrecta and Xenomorphia hanscheni, found in France, parasitizing host fly pupae dated back to the Oligocene, which was 33.9 million years to 23 million years ago.
And of course, like xenomorph just means strange form.
Yeah. That's cool. I always like when they actually use good Latin roots to
Yeah.
name stuff, you know?
Yeah, which is how we go about naming species normally,
Mm.
as we try and, use adjectives and things and convert them into Latin or Greek
Yeah.
to come up
I've
with a
been
species name.
lamenting the fact that there doesn't seem to be or an easily accessible Latin for scientists course. Like
Mhm.
I had a look at Duolingo because I don't want to learn how to say how is your uncle today in Latin because I'm never ever going to use that.
Yeah,
But if I could just learn like 10,000 or like maybe a word or 5 words every day or something of Latin, and then looking at a scientific name and be like, "Oh, okay, that means red beak
yeah,
broadwing,"
yeah,
and then I'm
yeah,
like, "Oh, what kind of bird is that?" "Oh, a red-beaked broad-winged bird."
yeah.
Like, that would be so
Definitely
convenient.
when I was doing my PhD and first starting to name things, I looked everywhere for a course like that because
Mm,
there's so many rules you have to make sure you follow when you're naming species
Oh,
properly
really?
that kind of rely on you having a bit of an understanding of how the Latin works, because we have to, for example, a species name, the way you put two Latin words together, for example, to make a species name sort of has to, try and make sense. And the Latin is a gendered language, like a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
romantic languages. So, you can have female and male endings to words. And for example, if the genus name is a female word, the species name then needs to be, if it's Latinized, also needs to agree in gender with the genus.
Oh my
So you have
God.
to have an understanding of, if the word you're using is an adjective that can, have a male and a female form, it has to match the genus that you're putting that species into. So it can get a bit tricky to
Yeah,
do
I
it
had
all
no
correctly.
idea that there were so many rules about naming. I mean, because I knew, oh yeah, it's Latin and, you broadly describe it. I didn't realize you had to follow Latin grammar as well to
Yeah,
actually do
yeah.
that. That's really
You
cool.
can get around it a bit. Sometimes we tend to use nouns instead of adjectives, and that way you don't have to worry about whether the gender of the word is agreeing.
There's some
But yeah,
academic in some university somewhere that's going like, oh, all these scientists misnaming Latin and he's like some romantics language
yeah,
expert and
yeah,
they're probably
yeah,
just mad every single day that
yeah,
there's
yeah,
so many scientific
yeah.
names that are not
That are
grammatically
not
correct.
correct. Well, there's a whole code that we have to follow, the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, and there's a
Oh, that's
committee
cool.
that makes sure that that we're following the code and making sure that species are being named correctly. But that doesn't mean you can't still have a bit of fun with it, which is what we did with
Yes.
the Xenomorph name.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, the
Sorry, I
life
took you off on
cycle.
a train
Yeah.
then.
I always find that I end up on big tangents, but that's okay. I feel like that's part of it anyway. Yeah, so the sort of broader life cycle of the xenomorph looks like we've got an egg phase, and then there's what I think the community of nerds refers to as the face hugger body
hmm
type with the creepy hand
Yeah, yeah. Like
things.
morphologically, it's like some weird little like horseshoe crab or something, isn't it?
Yeah,
The
that's a good point.
very kind of spider-like.
Then we've got the chest burster, which we love, that creepy snake thing coming out of the
hmm
chest. And then it appears to just molt straight into an adult, unless there's more stuff happening off screen. But seems like a huge biological change to go from like this big to a full adult man size. And then in Aliens, we also see the Queen as well, which is really cool. And so many questions about that when we get there. But anyway, shall we start having a think about the egg?
hmm
Okay. So, what we start to see around minute 31 of the movie is when we actually start to see the humans and John Hurt specifically comes in contact with the egg, which is described as pretty leathery. It's quite large. I'd say it's maybe like half a meter tall, maybe a bit taller. And yeah, as soon as he touches the egg, it seems to hatch immediately. So to me, that kind of suggests that it could be in a state of diapause. And because, it's like an empty, rocky alien planet with nothing around there, no other life as far as they know. So it would make sense to me that if it uses some kind of mammalian host, that if it feels, like body heat or contact or
It's
something,
responding to some kind of
yeah,
stimulus, whether that, like you said, heat or pheromones or
yeah.
something the egg is responding to hatch, right? Otherwise, it's a very convenient movie plot
There's
coincidence that it hatches right then.
Yeah, it's like this egg has been here for 1,000
Yeah,
years
yeah.
and it hatched right now, or like it
Yeah,
got laid 2 minutes ago and now it's hatching straight away.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, did you have any thoughts on the egg from a like an insect? If there's
uh,
any insects that might mimic that kind of long-term diapause?
yeah, I mean, there are definitely insects that will lay eggs in fairly kind of not inhospitable, but, you know, habitats that maybe they wouldn't survived in if they hatch straight away, and they wait until the correct thing happens for the larvae or nymph to actually hatch out of the egg. Because insects can have two different sorts of life cycles. We've got things that are have complete metamorphosis, where you go from egg to larvae to pupa to adult, or you have incomplete metamorphosis, where you go from egg to nymph, where the juvenile looks a lot like the adult phase, and that nymph will then slowly grow up into an adult through a series of stages. And I guess before you want that larvae or nymph to hatch out, you want to make sure the environment is friendly towards that juvenile stage. And so there are insects that will lay eggs, for example, insects that might live in really ephemeral waterways or in rock holes and things like that, where they might lay their eggs when there's water, the water dries away, the egg is able to survive, you know, being dry and being hot and in the soil. And then when it, you know, receives some kind of signal that the water is coming back and it's rained, those eggs are able to all suddenly hatch out and the insect to complete the rest of its life cycle before that water evaporates or retreats again. So there's definitely examples of that kind of thing in the real life.
I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but do you have any up your sleeve?
There's lots of insects that live in rock holes that do it, because I know this basically from a PhD student that's in our lab, Brock Hedges, who's been working on the invertebrate fauna of rock holes in South Australia and studying the life cycle of some of these cool insects. In that he's done some studies where they take some soil from when the rock hole is dry, and then they rehydrate it, and it allows all the insects to come out and breed and start their life cycle. So things like mosquito larvae, like midge larvae, things like that. I think he's had other invertebrates like, what are those things that can survive anything? Tardigrades and
the creepy ones that
the
when you look at them under the microscope and they're just like
and little like crustaceans and ostracods and things like that as well.
So are tardigrades actually insects? Because I
No,
thought there
they're
was
not.
some other microorganism thing.
Yeah, they're closely related to insects, but they're not insects. They are. I'm trying to think if I think they're the one of the groups that's thought to be the sister family to, or sister group to arthropods.
Oh, okay.
I think in most studies now, the velvet worms, Onychophora, come out as a sister group, and tardigrades kind of come out in a few random places. They're one of those groups that really jump around the phylogeny.
Yeah. Okay. So tardigrades are just weird.
Yeah, tardigrades are weird. And like they're weird again in terms of things that can survive crazy environments, because they, you know, they can be in a dormant state even in their adult phase, not just like in
I
an
don't know
egg phase.
anything about tardigrades.
Yeah,
So.
they're amazing.
Yeah.
They basically like go into this little desiccated stage, and they can just survive like that for ages and ages and ages.
So they
even
just
as an
shrivel
adult.
up and then sort of rehydrate themselves.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Sorry, I've taken you on another tangent.
No, it's fine.
But yeah, in terms of insects that will lay an egg, and that egg will respond to stimulus like water, definitely things like midge larvae can do it.
Is it seen in any parasitoids, or is it just not something that would evolve that way because it's way more convenient to deposit your eggs on a living organism than sort of plant them somewhere and just hope it happens upon it?
I'm not sure actually off the top of my head. There are parasitoids where rather than laying the egg directly on or in a host, they lay their egg somewhere which gets picked up by the host, at a later stage.
Oh, like ticks or something? I feel like they hatch in the grass and then jump onto cows.
Yeah, but I guess
something.
that's after that juvenile stage has hatched. That bit gets picked up. I'm pretty sure. Again, I'd appreciate if you fact check it first, but I'm pretty sure there are some wasps. The ant parasitoids, Eucharididae, I think will lay their eggs outside an ant's nest, and the ant will pick up the egg and take it down into the nest, and that's when they hatch and start feeding in the ant nest.
That's very cool though. I was thinking there might not be anything in real life like that because I don't know, it seemed a bit impractical from an evolutionary perspective to be like, I am an obligate parasitoid of this thing, and if I don't have that this egg will never hatch, and then just like
Yeah,
plops
yeah.
it anywhere, you know?
I guess if it helps you link in with the host's life cycle, right? Like if you are laying your eggs at a time when the host is not around, you want, which probably fits really well with alien, you want that egg to be able to survive until the host is there. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's not gonna, live for a certain time.
Yeah. I'm now wondering how long they can survive for. But we don't have the answer to that without a lot of speculation. Also, in the first Alien, it seems like the eggs, like there's just one solitary egg. But then in the second one, there's like there's a queen that lays hundreds of them in the same area. So I was thinking, could that be something like a locust or a cricket, where they could be like a solitary organism, but they behave differently if there's a lot of them around?
Uh, as in they have a different form if there's a lot of them around.
Well,
Yeah, I
I
don't
guess,
know.
the whole thing's a stretch anyway. But yeah, because if there's one egg, all the rest could have died, but you don't really get the camera angles. I don't know. It's
Mhm.
sort of implied there's only the one. And then in the second, there's, heaps and heaps of eggs. So I'm wondering, yeah, are there any insect taxa you can think of that would change their egg laying strategy based on like environmental conditions or something?
I'm not sure. At least not in the wasps I work on. They're either solitary parasitoids in which they will only lay one egg, or they're gregarious in small numbers in that they might
Hmm.
lay, 4 or 5 eggs on a host or in a host, or they're like really gregarious, in which case they normally lay, 20, 30, 40, 50 eggs in a
Yeah,
host.
the poor
Or,
caterpillar.
yeah. So at least in the wasps I work on, it tends to be more about the wasp species as to how many eggs they lay, and they don't vary it. But I definitely can't say that whether that changes in all of the animal world. I'm sure there's
Mm.
examples out there somewhere of animals that change how many they're laying based on the environment and the conditions, whether it's a good year or a bad year or that kind of thing.
So I looked this one up, and there's an awful lot of factors that control reproductive output in wasps. But I found a very interesting one by Rivero et al. 2001 called Lifetime Allocation of Juvenile and Adult Nutritional Resources to Egg Production in a Holometabolous Insect. And a holometabolous insect is that kind that goes through a complete transformation like a butterfly or a wasp, but not something that just hatches from an egg and it's basically a small version of an adult. So this paper found that if you had good nutrition as a larva, you had a higher reproductive output as an adult. And another paper by Sibley et al. 2001 studied factors affecting reproductive output of Chironomus tentans and found that fecundity, so reproductive output, correlated with adult female size. And other factors that could affect the number of eggs laid could include pheromones, temperature, and many other things.
Yeah, there must be so many animals that do that, whether they have one young or like four or something. I guess that's usually related to like nutrition in the mother. So, theoretically, what could have happened for this one egg is maybe there was like a single female xenomorph that didn't have any nutrition because, it's a barren planet, and maybe somehow it just got there. And then it sort of just like had enough in it to lay one egg and then disappear. It died, and maybe the skeleton's around the corner or something.
Mhm.
But I guess that's more of a mystery. That
Yeah, or there were lots of eggs there. I can't
Yeah,
actually
that's true.
remember now whether there were one or lots, and whether it was just that there was one that they came across.
Yeah, that's true. They could. Really, anything could be
Yeah,
explained by
yeah.
the camera angles didn't
Yeah.
show it, but it was in the background.
I just rewatched that scene and can confirm that Kane says that it's full of leathery objects like eggs, and there's many of them. There's not just one.
At 35 minutes, our Xenomorph hatches and launches itself onto Kane, poor old John Hurt. And it has like an acid that melts through the helmet. And then later on, we see the acid melt all the way through like 3 platforms of a spaceship. I know in a lot of animal, well, sorry, not animal, because insects are animals. I mean, in like the vertebrate
Invertebrates.
animals, there's quite a lot of, like venom spitting or that kind of, venom being released. But is there anything where like insect hemolymph or any other animal's blood is that toxic? Because again, that seems like a dumb evolutionary strategy that you have to be wounded to be using your wounds as an asset
Yeah,
despite
it's a defensive
trying not to
strategy.
lose. Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually interesting you bring this up because there's been a case recently in the media of someone who was bitten in Bali by a species of rove beetle that actually has something very similar to this.
Oh,
And
cool.
I can't remember what the common name of them are, but there's a group of rove beetles. So rove beetles are a family of beetles that are quite long and thin, and the elytra, so the little wing covers, are quite short, which is one of the identifiable features. So those little elytra or wing covers, the hardened forewings don't go down the length of the abdomen,
Mhm.
which is a good way of spotting them.
And you also see them in your compost bin?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I collected a few from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not all, but some of these rove beetles, their hemolymph is very toxic and irritating to humans. And so it's not that I misspoke before, it's not that the beetle has bitten her or bitten people who get irritated by these things. It's actually when they're crushed or brushed
Mhm.
against things, they release the hemolymph, which is irritating. I mean, it can cause some pretty bad rashes and inflammation, and some people react really, really badly to it. And we've had some outbreaks quite a long time ago in Australia where, whole communities were evacuated because there was like a
Oh my
plague of
god.
these beetles. And,
Jeez.
you just accidentally roll over in your sleep and crush it. And then
Yeah.
you've got all these irritations. So again, yeah, it's kind of a weird defensive strategy because you have to be injured to release the toxin.
Yeah.
But I guess it comes from that, not that they're a social insect, but perhaps when they're often all breeding in large groups, you get that, you're releasing the defense that's going to help your egg mates or something, if the predator moves away.
Yeah. Do you think that the rove beetle's defense is for much larger organisms? Because I feel like that you'd still get squished and it's like, well, tough shit. You just got
Yeah.
squished. Or is it like is there much research surrounding how it's used against other like insect predators that are at least a
Yeah.
similar size?
I don't know, to be honest. I haven't looked into it. And I wouldn't have even known that these things existed if it wasn't for having to look them up last week.
So this was very interesting. The family of rove beetles is Staphylinidae, and within the genus Paedorus, they synthesize pederin, which is that toxic hemolymph that can give you a rash. This is very interesting because it's not universal to all rove beetles. It's not even universal to beetles in the same species. It's thought to be synthesized by an endosymbiotic bacteria, and so when mothers lay eggs, they pass on this pederin to them, but they also lose their own. However, if they eat eggs that contain pederin, it can build up their reserves again. So what pederin is apparently used for is it makes them poisonous, not venomous. Venomous is if it bites you, you die. Poisonous is if you eat it, you die. So beetles of the Paedorus genus are found to have a protective effect against wolf spiders that are trying to predate the eggs or the larvae, and they will clean themselves off if they come into contact with these eggs containing pederin. So there is a function, it's to protect against other things eating you.
Yeah, there's, especially in insects, there's always things you don't know and cool things to find out. And that
Yeah.
was when I was reading about these rove beetles and the quirky toxins they produce that.
It's so quirky and cute that it will send you to hospital.
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I'm definitely glad that I have you to talk about this, and because I knew that there would be all these weird insect
Yeah.
things out there that would have something in common with a fictional alien, where you know all us mammals are kind of basic bitches, and there's only so much
Yeah.
cool things we can do.
I feel like you'll need to look some of this stuff I'm talking about up, and you can just check it's all right and then add a cool little
Yeah.
narration in with
I'll
the
be
real
like,
facts.
and Erin was right.
Yeah.
The
This is what
whole
the
time.
rove beetle actually does.
Yeah. It always feels weird doing like narration.
Yeah. Do you listen to Ologies? She does it quite
I
a bit.
literally was thinking that because I was
Yeah.
going to say, oh, I don't want this to sound too much like ologies because I don't want to tread on someone else's podcast toes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty presumptuous of me to be like, yeah, I'll step on ologies
Yeah.
toes.
Yes.
Massive podcast. I'll probably have
Hey,
5 listeners in this world, which will be my mum.
everyone starts somewhere
True.
now.
That's true. Shall we move on to our creepy little face hugger?
Yeah, because
Thing?
the face hugger is probably the weirdest part of the life cycle, or at least the bit of the life cycle, right, that doesn't fit into a normal parasitoid life cycle. And
Ooh,
it's the bit
okay.
that makes it difficult to compare to a parasitic wasp because you have a parasitic wasp, it'll lay its eggs on or near or in a host. The egg will hatch out, and the baby wasp, the larvae, will then eat the host from the inside, and it bursts out like the chest burster. That bit's all very similar. But the fact that in the alien you have this extra life cycle stage that almost is like its independent organism that then produces another embryo or something,
Mm.
and you have this. Sometimes we see the face hugger still kind of alive after the embryo is inserted into the host, and
Mhm.
that's really weird, right? It's like you've got the egg which has hatched into something which has then produced an embryo, even though it's not itself the adult form.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a really
Yeah.
weird, you've got almost this alternating generations thing going
Yeah.
on, which doesn't happen much in animals, definitely doesn't happen in parasitic wasps. It's
I
kind
was
of
gonna
more
say,
similar to like what plants do.
I was thinking it might be similar to aphids. Like, my understanding was that in the southern hemisphere, because it's warm, the aphids just stay in a constant asexual life cycle anyway. So they reach like an adulthood and then asexually reproduce, because we never have that phase where it gets cold enough for them to like sexually reproduce. So I was wondering if maybe the face hugger stage is like an immature, like asexual reproductive strategy. But I also don't understand how that could work, because it feels very permanent for the chest burster to then like erupt out. And then, does that make any sense?
Yeah. I don't know much about aphid life cycles, so I can't I
Okay, I
can't
will
comment
fact
on
check
whether.
myself.
Hey, so I did fact check this, and although I was right on the aphid life cycles, if my theory was correct, then we would have to see the face hugger laying eggs too. So I just got a bit excited, and it doesn't work. Moving on.
Yeah, it is a really weird. It's probably the part of the life cycle that's most difficult to compare to real life animals that we have. Is it's basically like an embryo delivery device, like a living ovipositor almost, that hatches out of this. Well, the ovipositor lays the egg, and then the egg hatches out into this weird little embryo delivery device that
Mm.
is itself alive and has some form of intelligence and that kind of stuff. It's super weird.
Yeah, because I mean, it would make more sense if it just hatched out and it was already like a chest burster snake, because it's very snaky, the chest burster, and it somehow like slithered down the throat and then like gestated and grew
Yeah.
there. That would make more sense to me. It seems really weird that it scuttles up like a crab then just sits there
Yeah.
and then I want to know what's going on inside as well. Like,
Yes.
is
Yeah.
it,
And that's where you can kind of like, if you wanted to force it into being more similar to a parasitoid wasp life cycle, then you go, well, this
is
thing
it
isn't
over
actually
positing?
a well, or you go this the facehugger isn't actually a separate organism. What it is a, you know, the thing we see left over at the end is just the exoskeleton or something, and the
Hmm.
actual organism has moved from that form into the host or something, like, you know, it's gone through some kind of morphous into the next form into the host, or
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. There's
It
lots of
is.
ways we can force it to fit the life cycles we're familiar with, but I guess that's where it comes
Yeah.
back to it's fiction, right? And it's
Yeah,
alien, and we're seeing a
exactly.
life cycle that we don't normally see in animals on Earth.
The more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm like, oh, what a stupid life cycle. Because so it goes up, sits on the face. I'm so sorry I said that. And it's like there indefinitely. Like the human host is still alive. So has it shot some tendril down into like the chest, which is now turning into a chest burster, and then like does it detach, or does it just sort of implant an egg there and then just hangs out on the face for some reason? The one thing I do want to say in support of the facehugger is that its morphology does seem to line up really well with its function. Like it's got its little arms to crawl along the ground and grip onto the head. And then also I did quite a lot of screenshots of every scene with the morphology aspects. It's got like a long sort of like tongue protrusion that sort of would be about the thickness of like a human throat. Or actually, I don't know how thick an esophagus is, but anyway, it's the right size to go through the human mouth and go down like the trachea or the esophagus, which I still don't know which one it is. I'm thinking trachea because it seems to burst out of like the lungs rather than like a stomach.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a very well adapted organism. It's
Mm.
pretty cool. Very good creativity in coming up with that one.
Yes, they did do a really good
Yeah,
job of
yeah.
such a cool alien. It's awesome. So I actually have some extra comments from the movie that's
Mhm.
might be helpful. So they comment that the facehugger paralyzes its host and feeds oxygen down the throat. So it is, I guess, utilizing Kane's body to grow the embryo of the chest burster while paralyzing. So maybe there's some sort of paralysis venom released as well or something.
Which we do see in wasps, like things like the spider wasps family Pompilidae will sting their host, the spider, and they'll inject a venom that paralyzes the spider so that they're able to then grab hold of the spider with their mandibles and drag it to their burrow, put the spider inside, and lay their egg on top. And that means when their baby hatches out, they've got, you know, the spider there ready to
Ooh,
parasitize,
nice.
but it's paralyzed so that, you know, the spider isn't going to attack the little baby wasp, um,
Yeah.
which is, yeah, pretty cool. And we definitely see paralyzing venoms in wasps and in other insects.
Well, if I'm jumping ahead of myself too, but in the second Alien, there's something pretty similar to that actually, which might have been further adapted from parasitoid wasp, I don't know, origins.
Mhm.
Is that there's like a whole nest of them, and there's all this gooey slime and stuff where there's all these humans that are immobile against the thing and they can't move. But because Ripley starts talking to one of them, who I think she just says like kill me or something, and then a chest burster comes
Mhm.
out. But I guess like that's like the Pompilidae family of, you know, an adult has paralyzed a host and
Mhm.
dragged it ready for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
babies
Put
to
it
hatch
somewhere
and
safe.
have
Yeah.
convenient prey. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're excellent mothers. They, you know, take the prey, put it somewhere safe so that their egg can hatch and the larvae can parasitize the host, and it's fresh, nice living meat, but
Mm.
it's
Yum yum.
immobile and it can't move anywhere. So yeah, that kind of stuff is definitely applicable to the real world.
Yeah, I reckon that one definitely got swiped from the scientific literature
Hmm.
of like, oh, well, I'll take that cool trait. I do have one more note that I wrote
Hmm.
on the face hugger as well at 43 minutes 30 seconds that says that it appears to have an outer layer of protein that's being shed and replaced with silicon under adverse environmental conditions. So we have
Ooh.
something that's rapidly, I don't want to say evolving because like individuals don't evolve.
Yeah, adapting, rapidly adapting.
Yeah, do we see, I know this one's probably further out there, but do we see anything that the individuals are so flexible and adaptive that they can adapt to adverse environmental conditions quite rapidly? Is there anything that could be like that?
I'm sure there are some studies out there that look at how we call it plastic, the phenotype is, so
Mhm.
how able that the expression of the genetic information, so the phenotype's what we physically see, or how it behaves and that kind of thing, based on which bits of the genes are expressed, how plastic that is, so how able it is to be adapted to what's happening around it. And I think for a lot of things, it is more adaptable than we realize for a lot of organisms. And um, I think there have been some studies where they take animals and put them in different environments and look at how they adapt, and whether you can take a surface dwelling fish or beetle or something and put it in, say, a subterranean dark environment, and does that animal able to adapt and start being able to interact with that environment? Or can you take something that lives in a dark environment that has generally doesn't use its eyes as a sense and put it in a light environment, and will it you know be able to adapt and start activating the expression of those genes that will allow it to use its eyes again?
Yeah. In the same individual too?
Yeah, in the same individual. And I can't remember, or over generations, I guess. I can't, yeah, I don't know off the top of my head whether those studies have found that, this stuff can happen in an individual, or whether it takes many, many generations.
So, phenotypic plasticity is the ability of an organism to change in response to stimuli on the environment. And this usually happens over multiple generations. But it can also happen in individuals. So, the kind of response that you might see is morphological, related to shape, physiological, internal metabolism, or behavioral. So, Freud et al. In 2017 published a paper on within individual, i.e., happening in one individual and not over generations, individual plasticity in red deer. And they found that in these mother deer, the calf weight and the date of the calf's birth would change depending on the temperature the year before. If you had a cooler temperature the year before, birthing would be delayed, and a warmer temperature, it happened sooner. And that's an example of phenotypic plasticity. There's lots more.
Okay, so it's using silicon as like I guess like an exoskeleton.
Hmm.
But what's chitin made of? And do you know if there are any organisms that use like would use silicon, or would that be like it's too rare an element for it to be in common use as an
Yeah.
exoskeleton structural material?
Not as far as I know. I mean, most life that we have on Earth is carbon based. And that's one of those big hypotheses about if we found alien life,
Mm.
would it use carbon or would it use something else? So I don't know.
Is silicon right below carbon in the periodic table? So technically it could,
You're
I'm going to look it
testing
up.
my
I'm
periodic
going to
table
look it right now. I
knowledge.
haven't looked at a periodic table for like 5 years.
But I've definitely heard that mentioned in other sci-fi, right? Like silica-based life as opposed to carbon-based life. I think that's a fairly common hypothesis and trope in sci-fi.
Yeah, it is. So I guess that would make sense as a basis for life if it's bonding with stuff the same way, it's got the same number of electrons in it. Yeah, so it might bond in similar ways. So that could be plausible for our little face hugger.
And I mean, insects and other arthropods do, they shed their exoskeleton as they grow. So they'll grow from a nymph, they'll get bigger and bigger inside that exoskeleton. And then the only way to grow bigger is to shed it, and the new exoskeleton grows, which I guess is what definitely happens with our xenomorph, where we see it go from little tiny chestburster xenomorph to big adult xenomorph. For all we know, maybe there's several generations of
Yeah.
shedded exoskeletons lying around, although none of our characters seem to bump into any shed exoskeletons, at least from my memory. Although some insects, once they shed, will eat the exoskeleton
That is
to
true. Yeah.
regain the nutrients that they've lost. It's a lot of energy goes into shedding your exoskeleton and growing a new one. So lots of things like stick insects will then often eat the shedded exoskeleton. So maybe our xenomorph does that, which is why we see no evidence of it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty plausible hypothesis because it seems very unrealistic that something that's probably only like half a meter long and snake like could be a whole, adult human male size in one
One shed.
shed, yeah. And also I have spiny leaf insects at home and I've watched them eat their exoskeleton too.
I just looked up the life cycle of eukaryotids, so the ant
Mhm.
parasitoids, to see if I got that right. So and I didn't. So the female, the mother eukaryotid wasp will lay their eggs onto plant tissue, and then the larvae hatch out, and then the larvae are responsible for getting into the ant colony and
Oh.
parasitizing the host. So they travel along the leaf and attach themselves to foraging ants, and then get taken back to the nest to be able to attach to the host larvae, the ant larvae, which is pretty
That's
cool.
actually very cool and that does sound quite consistent with the face huggers because they kind of just leave
Yeah,
them, if the egg hatched and then there was no human around, it's just like tough shit, go and crawl off and
yeah,
find
yeah,
a
yeah.
human.
And it's quite similar, hey, because the larvae have to actually have to attach themselves to the host,
Mm.
or attach themselves to a human who's going to take them back to the brood, so they can get onto their host and start consuming
Yeah. Well, we've found a cause for the
it.
face hugger. That's cool. Um so another thing, I do really want to start talking about the chest burster, but I have so many notes on the face hugger that it's taking all my time at the moment. It's interesting that the face hugger comes off his face and then it doesn't die immediately, but it seems to die pretty quickly after doing that. Would that be, is it semiparis, where something like it only reproduces once and dies almost immediately after?
Yeah, so that term, I think, refers to an organism which only reproduces once in its life cycle, once in its lifetime. And that fact that the facehugger lives for a while independent of the whatever is inside the host now, that really kind of indicates that we do have that, like, it's its own life
Mm.
form, right? It's not the same life form as the new thing in the host. We've got an adult of one form, the xenomorph, producing the egg, which hatches out the facehugger, which lays its own egg or embryo, and then it dies. And then you've got the chest burster, which is hatching out of that egg or is that embryo.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a super weird life cycle, quite unlike anything we see in insects.
Well, we can finally talk about the chest burster now. I gotta say, out of the different life stages, I really don't like the chest burster. I think its morphology is really stupid, and it doesn't seem to line up with what it actually does. Well, I was thinking that it's got quite like a blunt head. So that would make sense. It's got quite a powerful limb, I guess, to punch through the rib cage
Hmm.
and out of a human.
Yeah,
And then
chews
it's sort of
its way out.
snake like. Yeah, so I'm like, oh, yeah, that kind of works. But I'm not convinced it really chews its way out either because it seems so sudden and like the pain onset is so quick too that I think it's more like a battering ram to get out. In which case, the fact that it has this line of really, really stupid small teeth, and I'm like, I just don't get it. And it
Yeah, I
doesn't
don't
seem to
know.
have
It
any
actually, it kind
eyes.
of looks like quite similar to the wasp larvae when they come out the caterpillar.
Really?
'Cause, well, they're like, they've grown and grown and grown inside the host as they've eaten it. And they've got bigger and bigger until they've sort of eaten all the important bits of the host that they need. And they are quite clever in that they will not eat the essential organs first. They
Mm.
will eat all the unessential stuff, which is why the host stays alive for so long. And the caterpillar is wandering around, still eating the plants and doing its own thing, which is
Like
very much
Cain
like
eating dinner.
exactly. It just
Mm.
goes about its life unawares. And then those larvae will suddenly be ready to metamorphose and come out, and they will kind of burst out of the caterpillar. And they've kind of got weird little teeth things. Not that insects really have teeth, but like little
Yeah.
things to help them get out of the caterpillar through the exoskeleton. Um, but they're otherwise kind of pretty useless looking. The difference,
Mm.
I guess, is then normally that larvae will form a cocoon and go through complete metamorphosis into an adult that looks totally different.
Yeah.
Whereas what we more seem to see in the alien is that the chest burster comes out and it does have a lot of morphological similarities with the adult, at least in terms of the color and the head and that kind of stuff
Mm.
is resembling it. And you can only assume that it then goes through stages of growing and looking more and more like the adult each time. Or
Yeah.
it forms a cocoon and totally changes. Who
It would
knows?
be cool if it did. I mean,
Yeah.
the ship seems pretty dark. There's definitely room for a cocoon there. Um, Also, there's a cat, so I wonder if the cat could have eaten chunks of exoskeleton, because that seems like something a cat would do. Yeah, no, that really surprised me because I was fully ready to just pile onto the chest burster as like a useless, like you're not even
Yeah.
realistic. But yeah,
No,
that's cool
like
to
the
hear. It's
larvae
actually
when they come out, the caterpillars are pretty useless looking. They look
yeah.
like just little maggots. They're little
So
wriggling
do the
maggots.
do the little parasitoid can you call them maggots, or is that exclusively for
I
for
guess
Diptera
maggots is
larvae?
more generally refers to fly larvae.
Okay.
So
Also mosquito larvae, or is it really just
it's
flies?
kind of just a common name that people use for whatever they want
Flies.
to, really.
Okay.
But I've generally heard it used for flies.
Yep. I
But
feel like
mosquitoes are flies.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's why I wondered if it was like a, just like a common non-scientific term, or if that was related to the order. But I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
think
on a
it normally
tangent,
refers to flies.
I feel like butterflies and moths would be so much less popular if you referred to caterpillars as maggots. Like,
Yeah,
but
instead
they
of
are.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, just the juvenile form.
yeah, right. So you said that the wasp larvae have little teeth as well to eat on the inside.
Yeah, I mean they're not like technically teeth, but they
Yes.
definitely have
Like a mandible type thing? Or is it
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's technically a
yeah, they have
mandible either?
uh I mean, it's probably a mandible because lots of insect larvae have mandibles. I I guess I tend to work mostly on the adult form, so I feel like
Mm-hmm.
my larval morphology is not up to scratch. But I would imagine it's a form of mandible that they use to help chew through the exoskeleton and make their way out of the caterpillar.
Yep. So would that also be for consuming tissue inside as well?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, oh, sorry, just had another idea. When larvae are inside a caterpillar, I guess this is a whole philosophical question now. Do you think the caterpillar can feel that, or is there often some kind of, like paralyzing or like numbing
Mm.
secretion that stops the caterpillar from feeling that? Because I feel like in vertebrates, quite a lot of parasites, like a leech or something else, latch on or whatever, and then they have something so that you don't really feel it. So I
Yeah.
wonder if there's something happening like that.
For things that attack vertebrates, that's very important because of the way our nervous system works and how we feel pain. Insects definitely don't feel pain the way we do. They respond to stimuli, but their nervous system is very, very different from ours. So it may just be that the way the nervous system is set up is that the the caterpillar isn't able to, I guess, feel the larvae inside them. I can't say that for certain, but I would say that's probably the case, because it does just keep going about its daily business. It will keep feeding and growing. And there are even caterpillars, so the wasps I work on, the larvae come out while it's still a caterpillar, but there are definitely types of wasps where they actually will wait till the caterpillar has formed a cocoon and starts to metamorphise before they emerge. So the caterpillar still goes about its whole life cycle until it makes a cocoon, and that's when the wasps take their moment to emerge from the body or the pupa or the cocoon at that stage.
So there are some that are emerging while the Lepidopteran's in larval form, and there are some that are emerging once it goes into cocoon or chrysalis?
Yeah, depending on the type of wasp.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. So different wasps use different strategies as to when they actually emerge from the host. And in like the other cool thing that the group of wasps that I work on do is that they have a symbiotic virus that they inject into the caterpillar as well. And so what that virus does is it helps suppress the caterpillar's immune system, because even though maybe the caterpillar can't feel that the eggs or the larvae are in there the way we imagine feeling it, it still has an immune system that wants to attack, foreign bodies that are in there. And so
Did you
these
talk
wasps,
about this in a lecture? Because I feel
yeah,
like I remember
probably.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
it's
that's
just
so
such
cool.
a cool thing that it's had this mutualistic virus
Yeah.
associated with it, that has evolved with these wasps, and it's very host specific. So it's developed for their host's immune system that allows the eggs to hatch out and the larvae to live without the immune system of the caterpillar attacking them. So they're really cool that they use the virus. Other wasps might use a venom to help suppress the immune system, or they might have the eggs kind of encapsulated in something which helps stop the immune system attacking them. But yeah, there's some really cool evolutionary strategies.
Yeah. Again, insects are cool.
Yeah.
In that case, I'm definitely thinking that there is some kind of extra layer going on to the chest burster growing inside the human. Because, yeah, like when Cain woke up from the face hugger, he was like, oh, I feel fine. Like, I'm great. Let's go have dinner. He was totally fine. But, so there must be some kind of thing hiding it from pain
Yes.
receptors or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that's coming out in these little tiny teeth, or maybe it's eating the tissue in the chest and he's not feeling that either.
Yeah. Or feeding on blood or something rather than actually chewing through
Yeah.
tissue, or who knows?
Yeah. Because maybe the teeth are just for like consuming the exoskeleton shed, which kind of seems to like, what's it called? Like contradict the what is it called? Law of conservation of matter. Like matter can't be created or destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're a little snake like thing and then you burst out and then you're like, oh, I've got these little tiny teeth, I'm going to eat my shed exoskeleton to grow larger. Like that's not going to work. You can't eat your old exoskeleton and get bigger if you're
Because it's
only
not
eating
feeding
that.
in the meantime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Also, just doubling back on that, the wasp virus. Wasn't there a study where once they removed the virus or engineered the wasps to, which sounds really fancy, engineered the wasps to not have that virus, like parasitism rates were like 10% or something? They were really
Yeah, they
unsuccessful.
didn't remove the virus, but they show that the virus is what makes the wasp host specific. So
Mm.
these wasps, often, not always, there are always exceptions to the rule, but a lot of these species can only attack one or two kinds of caterpillars, because that virus, it seems, is the reason that they're very restricted, because the viruses are very specific to different species of caterpillar and moths and butterflies' immune systems. And so if they take that wasp and try and get it to parasitize a different species, or if they put their eggs in a different species that isn't susceptible to the virus, I think the eggs and stuff are able to survive and the parasitism isn't successful.
So it's the fact that the virus is host specific to the caterpillar.
Mm-hmm.
And because the wasp eggs don't get picked up by the caterpillar's immune system. and they're
Yes.
able to survive. But
Yes.
because if you tried to put that virus or, in a study into a different kind of caterpillar where the virus isn't able to survive, those eggs also won't be able to survive because the caterpillar's immune system is like, can you get out here?
Yeah. And it comes back to things like COVID, and that, people are very familiar with that at the moment as a virus that attacks its hosts. And we know that that virus is able to suppress the immune system and affect particular kinds of species like humans. And, there's been studies that show that dogs can get it as well, or big cats can get
Yeah, I
it.
feel like a monkey or a tiger got
Yeah, they had to be
COVID.
really careful with the big cats and stuff in zoos, right? Because they were worried they would get COVID.
Actually, koalas as well. Yeah.
So it's obviously, quite a broad virus. It can affect a lot of mammals, but it probably can't affect, say, a reptile or something. I don't know. Maybe it can, but yeah, those viruses tend to be quite specific for who their host is. So in this case, the wasp virus is quite specific towards particular kinds of caterpillars and works on their immune system. So even if the wasp laid its egg in a different caterpillar, that virus wouldn't work as well, and the immune system of that different caterpillar might be able to destroy the eggs really easily.
Could it be the case where that wasp could still lay eggs in a different caterpillar and it would get away with it? As in
I'm not
that
sure.
caterpillar's immune response isn't primed to pick up those wasp eggs? Or is that one of the cases where it could do it, but it doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I'm not sure. I guess it's evolved to have, know to search out that species of caterpillar, and it's using the pheromones that caterpillar is producing to try and find it. So, everything has built it to that point where that's the species it wants to hit and wants to target.
Yeah.
I don't know. So many questions out there.
It also feels like many of these are like, oh, that could be a PhD project.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
No
for
worries.
being on. It's been really interesting. Is there anything you wanted to talk about as like a little plug if you've got like a
Oh,
paper
okay.
coming out, or you want people to listen to a really cool, whatever on insects? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I guess my plug would be we run a project with regional schools where we're getting them to find insects, and we're telling them a bit about what they find and looking at the DNA and that kind of stuff. So if you're a teacher or you are interested in doing some insect exploration yourself, the project's called Insect Investigators, and we've got lots of really cool resources on there for teachers and for people wanting to do things with their kids at home with insects. So yeah, check it out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Erin.
No worries, Nat.
See you. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to Type 1 Error. This podcast was created, edited, hosted, researched, and produced by Natalie Brown, and the music is also by me. The excellent cover art and logo is by my sister Alexandra Brown. This podcast is currently non-monetized, and so the best way to show your support is to rate, review, and subscribe to Type 1 Error wherever you listen to podcasts. At the time of recording, Type 1 Error is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Podbean. Reviews are really important to establish a new podcast, especially since it costs me money to produce episodes. You can also engage with Type 1 Error on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the links in the show notes, or join the Facebook group, The Type 1 Errors, for community and episode discussion. For questions, feedback, or episode requests, email me at type1errorpodcast@gmail.com with the one spot with the number, not the word. Remember to keep your curiosity every time you consume your popcorn. See you next time.